Booktube, it's Amy. I'm back again with some more pages from the private papers of a bankrupt bookseller. This is, of course, the 1931 fictionalized account of a bookseller. And so we are on page 74 today, beginning with a section titled A High Calling. I am sorry for my neighbor, the draper. His trade is a disenchanting one. He cannot feel romantic about women. He only sees them at worst as creatures seeking to adorn themselves, at best as naked obscene animals to whom shame has come, seeking to clothe themselves and hide their indecencies. I am sorry for my friend the butcher. His trade is a disenchanting one. Food, the 3 times repeated daily joy, is for him a dull affair. The ecstasy of appetite is an affair of trade. He sees only mankind as a mob of perambulating bellies needing to be filled. I am proud of my trade of bookselling. It is enchanting, it is romantic, it is as wonderful as the world and as illimitable as the universe. It makes lovely women lovelier. It makes the commonest victuals the very food of the gods. It is a high calling. And the next section here is titled Poetry, Books, and Poems. I want a book of poetry, something for a girl. The request was put to me rather diffidently for all the bluff rudeness of the speaker. It left me speechless for a moment. How do I know what books of poetry young girls like? How do I know that girls like poetry at all? My hesitancy was apparent to my customer, and his words went on again. She is a junior hockey international, he added. There is no reason but decision came with the abruptness of falling of the guillotine. Maysfield, I said. The new complete edition of Maysfield. He looked at the book. I don't know his work at all, he said. I turned the pages, for I knew the book well. I hesitated at Sea Fever, passed by Cargoes, and stopped at Beauty. Read that, I said. I think any girl would think that wonderful. I took the book out of his hand and showed him CLM, the thing that begins. In the dark room where I began, my mother's life made me a man. He read it through, and some of his ruddiness seemed less coarse when he got to the end. I could see, though he held the book above the level of my eyes, I could see when he read, O grave, keep shut lest I be shamed. I knew he had no wife now. I knew he only had one daughter. I knew I would sell him Maysfield for that daughter. I'll have it, he said quite shortly. There is just one other I would like you to look at. It is quite short. I turned to the centurions and took his 8 and 6 away to the till while he read it. There was 1 and 6pence change. When I handed it to him, he took it quite blankly. He turned on his heel, his finger in the book at the page on which the centurions is printed. He walked out of my shop. Who would believe it, the emotions that may come to a struggling bookseller? I don't know the man. He was a stranger come, I fancy, to see his daughter at the young ladies' college here, and Maysfield, and I marked him today. What is it in poetry that makes it so wonderful a thing? I don't know, but it makes me feel the awful strangeness of men, how incalculable we are. If I had said Browning and shown him Love Among the Ruins, would the effect have been the same? Has he read, O mistress mine, where are you roaming, oh, stay and hear your true love's coming? And if not, would those words of Shakespeare's have had the same effect? Ought I not to have sold him the Oxford Book of English Verse, or its companion, the Book of Victorian Verse? The responsibilities of bookselling are immense. I shudder and almost cower now down by my shelves of business books. My eyes find repose on a shelf of Sir Isaac Pitman's Industrial Administration series. There is no certainty. There is no sense of the unfathomable immensities. There one can hand out one's wares without a tremor. Whose soul is shaken now till the end of time by Mr. James A. Bowie's book, Sharing Profits with Employees, or Samuel Crowther's Common Sense in Labor? These are not dynamite, nor yet quicksilver. They may be the substantial bricks from which the New Jerusalem is to be builded, but they certainly feel no more than mere bricks to my hands. Poetry, I write the word. The experience is still fresh with me, and I come back to this back shop of mine to turn over my mind. I see myself, a collection of moving molecules, I suppose mostly putrefying, a sort of thickish slime on the surface of matter in which moves and stirs an emotion, a thought, a dulled, formless radiance, responsive and throbbing still to the moments when I turn these pages for my customer. It is quite inexplicable. I sit buttoned in my clothes, thatched over inadequately with hair faintly moist. My little room is too painfully cramped and little. I go out again, restless, to my shop. I always like Arnold Bennett for recommending Aurora Leigh. It is good poetry to me and suits what literary stomach I have, rather better than his other recommendation, Paradise Lost. His book, How to Live on 24 Hours a Day, was one of the great stimulants of my disordered youth. I have my own edition published by the New Age Press in 1908. I get it down to read again. Poetry, says Bennett, is the highest form of literature. It yields the highest form of pleasure and teaches the highest form of wisdom. I am all for the narrative poets in a way. What better than the lays of ancient Rome, or the lays of the Scottish Cavaliers, or the longer poems of Sir Walter Scott? I am not a vers libre man. I like rhyme and recollect Samuel Taylor Coleridge's declaration. I wish our clever young poets, there were clever young poets then as now, would remember my homely definitions of prose and poetry. Prose is words in their best order. Poetry is the best words in the best order. To a poetry bookseller is a problem. To a bookseller, poetry is a problem. There are some poets in regular demand, but there are no very complete series. The padded poets were very useful stock, but folks don't take to these today. Macmillan's Globe Library is useful to me, and for a good Shakespeare, I sell Dent's edition in 3 volumes. As a rule, I don't like pictures in books. Leave the ideas to the writer and his reader. I think, but in this instance, I can make an exception. The other pictures do not move me, but the picture of the Histories volume is an astounding thing. It hasn't been noticed by anyone as far as I have ever heard. I mean by anyone of importance. It attempts and succeeds in showing us the idea behind the sonnets. The traditional William Shakespeare, a young William Shakespeare in high-collared cloak and with a doublet with pointed embroidered cuffs, is pulling a curtain over the face and figure, hiding from us the mysterious Mr. W.H. This remarkable picture is by E.J. Sullivan, a fine illustrator. For the rest, poetry is a passing thing. Ben's Sixpenny Poets was a work of national importance for which Sir Ernest Ben deserved a baronetry, had he not already inherited one. These paper-covered leaflets, I wager, gave and give more joy than all the legislation passed since the war. They must have opened the door of poetry to thousands, and I know in my little way I have sold hundreds. Instead of raising the school age or raising the pay of teachers or building bigger schools, my politics are to give prizes and subsidies for good books. We have the Hawthornden Prize for authorship. Why not a prize for publishing? I am all for giving honor to the writer, but I know the courage that goes to make a publisher. These writers think themselves brave figures in the boards of life, but they would be poor ghosts but for the bold publisher who bodies them forth. If poets had to make their living by reciting to living ears, the calling would cease to be a drawing-room one. The publisher saves these shy creatures that shock to their sensitive souls, and they are not always as grateful as they might be for it. Of the service booksellers renders to poets and poetry, I will make no claim here. I am going up to walk and to recite myself all the poetry I remember. The flagstones shining after rain will find voice in me. I will be the expression of absolute poetry, which is defined, I see, in a book of reference as the concrete and artistic expression of the human mind in emotional and rhythmical language. In a few minutes, then, one human mind will be expressing itself in emotional and rhythmical language. I will be saying over the 100th psalm from the Scottish Psalter, the Road of Mandalay, Sinara non nobis, the passage from the Tempest beginning, Our revels now are ended, Gray's Elegy, I can say it all, Swinburne's The Pilgrims, that shortest poem in the English language by W.N. Ewer, some of the Shropshire Lad, a good whack of the Song of the Open Road, Macefield's Beauty. I will say all these between the planets and the pavement, and when I come home, none surely will deny that I am a qualified bookseller, qualified, if not to pen, at least to peddle poetry. My poet's walk ended in a pub last night, and I went to bed befuddled. I fear it was a poor ending to a day lived so much with thoughts of poetry. I commiserate myself. I do it easily. If only people knew me as I know myself, life would be more endurable. I am not at all a bad fellow, really. I was always the most popular man in my platoon in France. These seem to be in the happy halo of the unreturning past. Poetic days. I used to recite then, but none of the things I recited last night. The favourite was a piece called Lasca, which a Scotsman always thought had something to do with Glasgow, a place which for him was the very home of poetry and romance. It was hardly a classic piece, but I must confess that my other piece, The Speech by Cassius, Honour is the subject of my story, used to go as well. For a while I was called Cassius, but the later phases of the battles of the Somme took away those who knew my fame, and use and wont returned to my abbreviated surname. This morning, I feel the poetic is not at all a durable fabric. It is not like some of the goods my neighbour is displaying today, guaranteed to wash and wear. It is, alas, and God be thanked, the stuff that dreams are made of. But in army phraseology, at the worst, it will always do me in this little life which is so smoothly rounded with a sleep. And that is the end of that section there. In the next video, we will read the section titled Reprieve, followed by books about food and drink.